So welcome everybody. My name is Stu Waldron, a member of OpenAPI through the OpenTravel Alliance. So I lead the OpenTravel Alliance, which works on standards for the travel industry, mostly around messaging at this point. I'll go into a little bit of a more expanded scope as we go. To set some context of how I'm coming at the problem of API chaos, a little bit of my background. I started at Eastern Airlines in 1977, and that's just when a lot of things were still getting automated in the airline industry. My introduction to IT was sorting punch cards, specifically from the mechanics, and 52 boxes of punch cards. And so if you've ever seen a sorter in the Smithsonian, or any places you can see them in a museum, you can't fit that many punch cards in there, so that was an interesting exercise. I went on to be an operator on the off shifts, and I ended up in programming because getting rather bored on late shifts and everything when all the batch jobs were done. I picked up a book on COBOL, created a blackjack game so us and all the operators could pass the time a little bit better. And when that was eventually discovered, Eastern Airlines had a choice to either fire me or move me into the operations team to actually work on the control program. The control program the airlines use, airlines were very early in worldwide connectivity because airlines needed to interline and transfer passengers between each other. All these protocols have been worked out in the late 50s and 60s, but were gradually getting automated in the 70s. So it was actually 1972 when the first fully automated ticketing system came up. That system is odd in that the normal batch systems of the time couldn't handle what the airlines wanted to do. So the system we operated on, and I programmed forever for the past 40 years, is actually a clone of the SAGE missile guidance system. So it is a near real-time system and gave us some interesting capabilities that are still used today by airlines, and actually if you use a credit card, it's going through one of these systems. So they're still in the background, very odd and a bit different systems. The networks at the time were 6-bit, and so in a text message through that network, you could only do all caps because there wasn't enough space to do lowercase as well. And so there's a lot of those things left over. And from there we went, in the network we had was truly connectionless and truly sessionless, because we were in private networks, leased lines all over the world, and talked to each other. So we really started with a lot of the concepts used today about there was no state inherent. State management was largely in the heads of the agents that used the system, and we did other things later. But after that, we ended up looking at SNA and LU62, then X25, and then for the airlines, AX25. The protocols went from P1024B, which is still out there in use today, to Edifact, to a couple other odd formats before in 1999, we started moving towards XML, and that's when the OpenTravel Alliance was created. So a lot of us were there at inception to make the initial messages we needed in XML, and since then we've created a message for just about everything, including golf tee times, restaurants, you name it. And they're used billions of times a day, still today. And that's the foundation that everybody has built on. The point being that through all these technology cycles, starting from 6-bit connectionless networks to connection-oriented SNA to X25 through sockets on, raw sockets on TCP/IP, been through a lot of these cycles. So a lot of the challenges we're facing today are nothing new. Been there, done that, and some of what I want to talk about today is, as a community, some of the solutions are rather obvious, and we as a community can go and get together and solve some of these problems, but a lot of it is definitely, the good news is problems we've actually all solved before. It's just recurring in a different way. The other thing is that I'm going to be looking at this and presenting information largely on the consumer side, the user of the APIs, because a lot of the focus at this conference and a lot of the work at Open API that we all do is from the developer's point of view and the provider's point of view. How do I put my best APIs out there? And they may be really good APIs, but there's a lot of issues that the consumers of APIs are facing, and we don't necessarily pay too much attention to them. So begin to talk about the scope of the problem, and travel is what I'm most familiar with. Been doing this quite a while, but it's an easy illustration of the problem. Just looking at booking a fairly typical trip, and I do mean an end-to-end experience. You want to go to a conference, and so you have to pull these pieces together. With just 3 options, like 3 air options, 3 rental car options, 3 hotel options, if I am the online travel agency or the one distributing this, I am already dealing with getting near 200 potential different APIs. And they all may be fantastic APIs, but their shop type functions, their book type functions, their ticketing functions, what order they go in, all of them are different. So this gets to be quite a challenge. And then the code I have to write is that with these offers, I'm trying to sort out what goes with what and what actually works. Is this hotel okay with this flight coming in, or especially then later on if the flight is delayed, what do I do? But just the normal math and everything is that's 153 relationships to sort out. And so if I were to go out and write an app and be a channel to deliver travel products, just to bring on the people in this example, roughly 200 APIs, I'm going to spend already a buttload of money doing that. You can be down in the 100,000s if it's following a pattern you're already familiar with and you're just trying to figure out what makes this particular API on this airline different from the other airline. Or if I have to bring up a lot of things, the costs get quite high. So scaling up is a real challenge in the travel industry. To go further looking at the trip level to give you the bigger scale, and a lot of these are just North America numbers, there's, again, over 5 million hotel rooms in the US, but more importantly, across 169 hotel chains. Now, yes, you can get a lot of the messages at the top 10 or so hotels in there, but the way Marriott does their APIs is not the same as Holiday Inn or IHG, and is not the same as Hilton. And then when you get down to the smaller hotels, there's over 4,000 hotels out there of 100 rooms or less. Part of the problem is I, as a distribution company or a channel, I quickly start dropping potential customers because I flat out cannot afford to handle that many bespoke APIs. Now, there's over 1,000 commercial airlines in the world. Usually most distribution companies pay attention to the top 500, but that's already half the airlines out there. You as a passenger would have to discover yourself, find their website and book it directly, otherwise it's invisible to you, because it's just not worth connecting to them. The biggest thing coming up is the long tail. So there's over 10,000 travel tour operators in the US alone. A much bigger number in Europe. It's really growing in Asia, India and other places. Most of them are just getting a website through about 20 or so different companies out there that say, I'll give you a website as long as I get to do the credit card transaction and collect my fee that way. But if you're going to do a trip level sale, you need the long tail. You need something for people to do. The airlines like to think of it as, oh, they're the best part of the experience. Frankly, I meet with a lot of hotel companies that laugh at that and say, yeah, everybody wants to talk about their seat in the airplane versus the luxury resort at my hotel. But still, even beyond that, why did you travel? You went to do something. You went to go trip level experience. And then, there's everything else. There's the cruise lines, golf courses, amusement parks, other things that go out there. And when you start adding this up, you're getting into tens of thousands of APIs a distribution channel, an online travel agency, or an app developer has to deal with, and they all act differently. So this really gets to be untenable. So what is really causing the problem, for us to do this? And again, the downside of this chaos is you probably all maybe have found one or two travel apps on a phone that in a very localized area can help you figure out, how do I go do this? But they can't scale because they can't get the data. It's just too damn expensive to connect to that many APIs. And so the problem that has prevented the long tail content from getting published is not by product descriptions, prices, or rules. So a lot of people that provide this travel products, they have it in their mindset and everything that proprietary APIs is a good thing. Because hey, and I'm gonna develop the best API, everybody's gonna love my API. Like, that's not the problem. They're also afraid that if they conform to a standard, that the standard is gonna force them to commoditize their product. And that does happen today. Some of the existing standards reduce a hotel suite down to a bed. And that bed is compared at one price to the bed in another competitor at the same price, and all the context about what your experience is actually going to be is missing. Airlines are reduced to a seat is a seat. Trains are reduced to a seat is a seat, and so, but it doesn't have to be that way. Good engineering can say, I can have an API structure where the product, the price, and the terms and conditions be conveyed in a consistent way, but don't affect at all what that product and price and rules are. So therefore, you can still compete on your product, your amenities, and everything else. It is not a technical problem, is the point I'm trying to make there. What is the problem is conflicting data definitions, conflicting data relationships. Again, as OpenTravel, we put messages out there since 1999, but people overlay some of the meanings of the messages. Unfortunately, even if something as basic as a station is a station is a station is not true. It should be a station whether there's a runway next to it, a rail line next to it, or a highway next to it because it's a bus stop. A station is a station. But unfortunately, people use the same exact message and don't even necessarily stick to that. And then even in travel, you as the traveler is known in the hotel industry as a guest, but you're known as a passenger to the airline. Now, some of these things are manageable. It's just when people do weird and wonderful things and just keep overlaying data elements, because that's easier than changing the message. They just reuse an existing element in the message for something else. Unknown or inaccessible rules. So you're presented a price, and quite often you're just given a Word document of anything at all that gives you any idea when this price can actually be offered to somebody. Again, there's all kinds of rules like a Saturday night stay required, or this is 2-week minimum advance purchase and other things. And it's a little bit different in the different things, whether you're talking hospitality or air, but still even knowing what the rules are that when this can be sold to somebody is, again, it has to be a sideband. It's extremely difficult. I know a lot of distribution companies that just basically have to have a team reverse engineering what the rules are by trial and error. Unknown SLAs, and part of that is even when the system's available. So I'm running my business in Singapore trying to sell stuff, and Delta Airlines, of which Delta's here, so I'll point at Keith a couple times, decided to take downtime at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, that made sense in North America. It wasn't so great with the guys in Singapore. But you don't even necessarily know that's going to happen. So suddenly you're trying to offer trips and everything, and a big component like a particular airline or hotel is missing because you had no idea that they were actually going to take downtime. Unknown API workflows. Now that is something in the SIG Travel we're working today with SIG Workflow to look at that problem, because everybody publishes some pretty good APIs, but it's by trial and error you can figure out what the hell order they go in. And again, that includes some rules about how that workflow goes. And so most of the developers have to do that by trial and error. It's not so much an API thing, but there's caches abundant in this travel world, because in order to get decent response time, everybody caches everything. And then the refresh rates of those caches and how often that the price is actually still available is everybody kind of makes that up on their own and everything, and that's something that drives travelers crazy, the number of times they shop for something but can't actually book it because it looked good in the cache, but it's not exactly available now. Unknown error codes and paths, and just undocumented, again, people that are using OAS compliant stuff, using path statements, dollar ref, and other things like that, but they don't use them in a consistent way. So from the API consumer, this is really hard. So somebody can be sending you an API that's actually a pretty damn good API, and technically by OpenTravel standards, it's okay, and by OAA standards, it's okay. It's a lovely API, but I still have to deal with all of this every time I connect to somebody. This is a more representation how it often works today is on the right side. You have a lot of legacy systems, and we call them CRSs or computer reservation systems, or sometimes for hospitality, it's called a PMS or a property management system. But these are the back ends that are most of the time still legacy systems, still very stateful, because again, the systems that I helped bring up in the 70s and everything, a lot of them are still there. And so they have APIs on front. So now the distribution channel may go ahead and hire the services of a consolidator or a gateway to say, well, at least that way I only have 2 bespoke APIs to deal with, but the consolidator is dealing with 3 or more back ends. But the problem is the APIs that are coming out of the back ends are proprietary. The API coming out of the consolidator is proprietary. And then even in the API, if the distribution channel sometimes offer it up to an app developer and everything to get access to more content, those are proprietary. Now in each hop, context is lost. And this is where the suppliers get mad because they see, quote, the commoditization of their product. Because I have to dumb down what it is to try to conform and fit it into a message normalization scheme, as we call it, and say, I really do have to get it down and present this. A seat is a seat. Here's the price of a Delta seat. Here's the price of an American seat. Here's the price of this hotel or that hotel. Again, everything gets commoditized down. And in fact, because our legacy airline background where a lot of these protocols started, we call it the tube with seats problem. Doesn't matter your Hilton hotels, your hotel property is going to be more or less presented as a tube with seats, because that's what these systems know how to do. That's what they're originally designed to do. What's making this actually even worse right now is the rush to move to JSON. So a lot of the people are go ahead and putting JSON protocol on top of what is otherwise SOAP statements that otherwise still have some legacy background from Edifact and everything before that. And so lipstick on a pig doesn't begin to describe what's happening right now. So this is the context of where we are today and the business impact of that. In 2019, according to the US Department of Commerce, all travel-related spend in just North America alone was $1.1 trillion. So that would be golf courses, restaurants, amusement parks, everything people would tend to spend money on while away from their home. 1/10 of that was actually available and manageable through what you'd consider an online travel agency or traditional travel agency. That is a whole lot of unmanaged travel that an app developer or a provider could be providing the service to say, look, I want to go to the ASC conference, just figure it out. But we can't figure it out because we don't have the content and the data because the APIs are all over the place, which still may be OAS standard APIs, but I just can't connect to that many endpoints in the current situation. So the point being with that is there's money out there. There's a lot of money to be made out there. So there's, finding money to pay for this once we can establish that how much money is being left on the table is not the problem. It's the community coming back together and say, what are we going to do about it? What are the things we can do to make this easier on the API consumer that has hundreds, if not thousands, if not 10,000 APIs to connect to and get consistent behavior out of this? And again, I'll double down on the last one, that I've gone through this with some of the big providers, AWS and Microsoft and everything. The cloud is ready for this. The cloud can handle, we're talking about billions of offers to manage. And so the AI ML tools are out there to do relevancy-based scoring on what is the best solution to you. They've been tested, they're known to work. We're missing the data. So this is not a technology problem. This is getting access to the actual travel content, and the barrier is how APIs behave so differently, even though they're within a spec. So the key, what I'm trying to get across here is, as a community, we have to expand our scope, our thinking, that what is beyond the specification, and also what is beyond the developer experience. Again, there's a lot of good content here and presentations, everything, how to produce a better API and make a more productive developer, which is all fantastic, but very little about that. Both people, multiple people are producing great APIs, but that doesn't necessarily help the consumer. Everybody tends to look at it as, I'm going to put out my best API, everybody's going to love it, everybody's going to connect to me, but it's not that easy, not by a long shot. So sustainability is, again, really impacted by, often fragility. It's keeping, my last job, I was a VP of architecture at a major distribution company, and 90% of our IT budget was just maintaining the connections we had, because people would change things, and figuring that all, I've left very little money on the table to expand and add any new content. And if somebody would come to me and say, I want to connect my small hotel, we'd say, thanks, but no, because I couldn't do enough bookings to cover the cost. It would take 6 months to a year or whatever to bring you on board, because now also when anybody changes anything, and in this distribution company, we connected to like 10,000 APIs, the knock-on effects of the testing and everything were just untenable. So error-prone coding of schema still blows my mind that everybody still thinks the way to go is manually create schema and update it and everything. To me, this is a bit crazy. And then reuse, particularly, I found in practice is really, really hard to achieve. And that's where I say a lot of the tools today try to do reuse of pieces of schema and pieces of solution and everything, but still actually getting that to work is hard. And like I said before, API behaviors and everything. So the message being, how in this conference and how when we look at things, take 2 steps back and say, beyond the developer, beyond the spec, what can we be doing that would make APIs easier and certainly more consistent, predictable behavior in how they act? And a quick example where we're making progress on that is the workflow SIG and what we're doing in SIG Travel with workflows, because the whole idea there is to make the workflow a machine-readable part of the documentation that goes out the door. And then tool vendors can catch up and say, I can automate this. So the other thing to do and consider is we need to leverage other standards bodies. And I don't mean just specifically in IT, though we touched on that in the talks we had last night about asynchronous API and other things. Actually, as OpenAPI, we're actually doing a pretty good job of working with some of the directly related industries. But I mean about getting into trade associations. So in the travel world, there are several big ones, like one called HTNG, which is a trade association in hospitality. But working with them and working directly with them, and that's why we started the Travel SIG, was to give a voice to say, well, what do you need? What can we do that would actually help with the overall problem of getting API costs down? And there's other standards bodies in all the industries that set things. I think as a community, we have to do a better job of connecting with them and find out what the low-hanging fruit is, what can be done that'll have the biggest bang of the buck to get API costs down. And outside of the spec, again, how do we bring the conversation that it's API behaviors that are the bigger part of the problem right now? And so we are having discussions in various ways in OpenAPI about, well, what does that mean? Is that the role of OpenAPI? Should we talk about, well, it should act this way. Should we put out a reference architecture? Should we put out a reference implementation? So we're having the right conversations, but it's getting that as a community more improvement to say, beyond the spec, what should we be doing? There's a lot going on good in tooling. Just my only complaint would be, is the tooling is still focused on the developer, the producer of the API, not the consumer of the API. So there's more, Karate Labs is here, and they're being very helpful that we're talking about exactly that. How can I use their functions to target it at the consumer of the API to easily understand what it is you need to do to connect? And do that in a replicable way that, again, beyond 5 different airlines, that I can easily figure out why the 5 different airlines act differently. Sometimes the biggest part of the chaos problem is just I have to manually figure this out for myself. If I can actually see working APIs right in front of me and compare one to the other, oh, that's where they're different. Even that is a tremendous step forward. Left shift development. So one of the things we do in OpenTravel is we do model-driven development. We create object models. As a community, we wrote a compiler, and we generate the OAS 3.0 output. So the idea is as a single source of truth is in the model of the traveler, and I can produce the APIs I need out of that. You want to change the relationships in the data. This acts as a data dictionary. I can get consistency that way, but leverage tools more and more and more to say, we have to look at this from a business point of view, from business objects, say what I need to do, and leverage the tool vendors to produce even more to say, okay, now it is I understand what you want to do and the context of that data. Let me generate what's on the wire. Accelerate to the cloud. So just also, this is specific to travel. Like I said, all those legacy systems are very stateful. And so a lot of people are putting some ancillary things into the cloud, but the move to the cloud is really where we'll get the scale and drive the costs down. But just so this is more informational, so you know what's going on in travel, moving these legacy stateful type activities into the cloud is a challenge. But there's a lot of good work going on that by various other standards bodies, but you know, that's also a work in progress, just so you know. It goes with APIs and also how to actually leverage what the cloud can solve a lot of problems. And then, like I said before, it shouldn't be a lack of money to facilitate making some of these changes, because there's hundreds of millions of dollars of unmanaged travel out there, and so the revenue opportunity is there. It's easy to see. It's just now, but we need as a community to have a more consistent way to go solve that problem, because if all the big companies solve it their own way, we're still in the chaos problem, that I can't distribute my product because I'm too damn expensive to connect to as a one-off. So that's what I had today. You know, what kind of a call to action, a lot of it is the scarce manpower problem. We need help, whether it's through the travel SIG, the workflow SIG, the overlay SIG, the other things, is to have the valid conversation to talk about how we can do things that bring down API costs, which would open up the market to more products and services being published. We need help. So that's just the last part, that again, there's a lot of good work being done in OpenAPI on that subject, but we need more input. We need more bandwidth to get things done. So I'll close it there. You can find me at OpenTravel. You can go to opentravel.org and see what we have going on there. But that was what I really wanted to get across to everybody, is that there's another side, another way to look at this problem. We're doing a pretty good job as a community of putting everything there to produce better APIs, but we're not producing consistent APIs. And if you're on the other side of the wire, this is a huge problem. I can't connect to 1,000 really good APIs that more or less do the same thing. It just gets to be untenable. So again, hopefully the conversation goes from there. What can we do to make API behaviors, loosely used term, more consistent? For that, I thank you. Are we out of time yet? Okay, any questions? Or I can go on about in the old days stories.
I might have one for you. That was really interesting topic that you said, hey, you want to, model places that you use your need first, right?
Mm-hmm.
That drive the standardization of the specs, right? Because you want to model your client behavior because it's your money, which makes sense. You mentioned a little bit of tool. Can you zoom in on that? How deep is that modeling? Is that just whiteboarding it out and dropping it on the board, or is there anything specifically used there?
What,
Help with that?
what we did at OpenTravel was about 7 years ago. We had already been producing the XML messages for a very long time. We learned a lot about XML and all collectively decided our messages suck. So part of this, we started the effort to redo our XML standards to be more friendly to actually operations or runtime use. Because a lot of people make the mistake when they do a scheme and everything, they develop a schema that's appealing to humans. Unfortunately, it's not humans that actually have to operate on this. So that started us down a path, and also microservices were really kicking off and everything. We knew we had to get to JSON. So what we did is we started playing around with various UML tools, and the UML tools, a lot of them could generate an XSD file out of that. We found they collectively sucked, because as far as making a model that was more amenable to actually runtime, how things would have to operate, UML would of course let you do anything you wanted. So we actually did our own modeling tool based on UML, put it out there so it has a few more bells and whistles in it to slap your hand if you're trying to do something that will mess up the operations runtime and other things. Then the generation was the second part. Instead of an XSD or Swagger at the time generator, we actually got some people together and wrote an actual compiler. And these are both open source out there, Apache licenses on them. So the compiler takes the output of that modeling tool and creates both the XSD and the Swagger file. So the other advantage right away, I can have one definition of the API. And I can give you an XML version, I can give you a Swagger version of it, it's all the same to me, which really helped the transition periods where people were moving over anyway. But that's just what we did. There are other tools headed in this direction to left shift to say, what are the various ways I can define from the business object image, which is a noun, what are the APIs or the verbs, the actions I want to take with it? So we did it as you create the business object, you take facets out of that, create a view, a facet view of it, and that goes through the compiler and becomes a resource with a identity on it and quote an API. So that way we could have everything Hilton and Marriott wanted in the object model, but still produce a message that looks different for Marriott than from Hilton, because they still wanted different things. And that solved our problem of everybody piling everything into the schema with optional elements and everything just to make everybody happy. Now we can make everybody happy, put everything you want in the model, but when you're actually creating an API, you're just picking exactly what you want. So our model holds the business object definition and the resource definition based off the facet on that. So that's our single source of truth. One company has done that to create jar files directly from that, and we've experimented in the past to maybe put out, for MongoDB or something to say, okay, this is still what the data looks like. Now how do I show something in shards and everything to be more compatible with data at rest? But it's still just an open source project that's out there. I'm trying to, again, I'm happy to see that there's other examples of people headed in the same direction. But I think that's a big thing as a community to talk about, and it was in the previous presentation, everything collectively, how do we more aggressively shift left, which would drive more consistency in what the API actually does, looks like, and another thing. And my soapbox is we got to get consistency. Does that answer your question? Sure. Right.
Bound to be some use cases that cannot be accommodated by the model, right? Then how does that fit into the model? How does that work?
So in the model, we're strict about versioning and namespaces. So the current path we're on right now is to, the model's online, anybody can go play with it, and think of that as the common model. What I'm working on putting into the little dev portal we've started is extensions where if I'm Marriott Hotels and there's things I want to add and extend the model for my own reasons, and whatever their reasons are is their reasons, that I'll be able to create a namespace for them and do that, and therefore, you as a startup, if you wanted to connect to Marriott, they would just have to give the permission to see their library extension, and then through inheritance, you will see exactly what Marriott has. So it's just really just to put the security in there and everything, that somebody could put something, quote, proprietary, business reasons, I don't care what the reason is, but make it easily accessible that I've extended the model, because even though that makes some of the messages different, it's still a whole lot better where we are today, because from the developer point of view, it's discoverable. I can easily see what those differences are. And that, again, it's not going to solve world hunger, but it'll take us way farther than we are today. Does that help? Okay, I think I should get out of the way. Thank you very much.